All right, perfect. Well, let's go ahead and get going. Welcome everyone here to another edition of the Rocket Pool Community Call. I'm always glad to be joined here by Langers. Good day to you, Langers.
Hey Ken, yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, it's been a busy week for me here, and just kind of coming back. And it seems like if you step away from the Discord or step away from crypto Twitter, it's it's almost like a new world to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, isn't it?
So, just an internal call today here. We had a couple of questions posed by Dr. Doofus we'll get to in just a little bit here. But I encourage anyone that's listening to, we'll have plenty of time today to come forward onto the stage here or just, unmute and ask your question. But a couple of things. Maybe we'll just start off just generally, though, Langers. And you want to just give us an update on how Saturn is progressing or any updates since last we spoke?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we're working on DevNet 2. A lot of the smart contract changes are nearing code completion, which is really good. And the smart node stuff is kind of like progressing as well. We're probably a little bit behind where we wanted to be, so I'll try to make sure I let everyone know what's going on with that. But it is progressing really well. Um, yeah, so I've been putting together like test plans and that sort of thing so that we're ready to kind of like go through and do the testing for DevNet 2. Um, so yeah, it's definitely getting there. And we've been kind of like shaking out, I guess, any little kinks and that sort of thing this week as well. So it's been really good actually this week.
Okay, so maybe help me understand a couple of things. I understand, I guess there's a new Ethereum testnet hoodie. And did that successfully launch? And where is Rocket Pool going to do its testing?
Yeah, so that's Genesis has happened on Hoodie. Um, we're kind of letting it kind of like settle down a little bit, and then uh, so actually what we're going to do is so obviously at the moment, DevNet and testnet has been on Holsky, but Holsky is essentially dead. So uh, and it will be kind of deprecated, I think, at some point. So everyone's moving to Hoodie. What we will probably do is we're going to focus on DevNet 2 for now and get DevNet 2 out. And then as soon as DevNet 2 is out, we'll deploy DevNet 2, but we'll also deploy the testnet, a Houston version of testnet to Hoodie as well. So that's kind of like the plan at the moment. We'll release DevNet 2 on Hoodie, let everyone know, and then we'll not long after we'll push the testnet or a Houston version of the testnet to Hoodie as well, so that we can start building up that. Ideally, we want to try and build up the Hoodie testnet so it can act as like a staging environment later on. And it also kind of like obviously helps anybody who's kind of like integrating with Rocket Pool and that sort of thing to have the testnet available. So we want to try and get that out as much as possible, but I don't want to kind of like distract the team too much. And so we're going to do DevNet 2 first, and then we'll do the testnet.
Got it. And so I didn't get a chance to really play with DevNet 1 until Husky crashed, and then it was, kind of unusable for me. But I guess with the DevNet applied to Hoodie, a person would go in there. You wouldn't need any existing Houston validators or anything. You would just go in and you would interact directly on the DevNet. So all you could really do is just simulate creating the new mega pools. You really can't simulate having old Houston mini pools and converting them or exiting and starting them. All you can kind of do is just play with a fresh Saturn version. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think the DevNets will probably just do that. That's kind of what the testnet will help us with as well. Um, to kind of like shake out any of those backwards compatibility sort of things. Obviously, we're going to be doing some of that testing anyway, because you, uh, yeah, that's a good point. Well, I think that actually I'm not clear on yet. I suspect we would, at the moment, that our plan is to launch the DevNet 2 code on the DevNet. So it wouldn't have any Houston stuff. So it would just be like the new functionality. We do need to test backwards compatibility stuff as well. Um, we did a lot of that during DevNet 1, so I'm not as worried about it. But I might review that and see whether we basically do a Houston launch for like a week or so, and then just the DevNet 2 stuff. I'll chat with the team and just make sure that see what their thoughts are on that. Worst case scenario, the testnet will have available. So we'll have Houston available so that people can spin up mini pools, and then once we release the Saturn code to the testnet, we can test that backwards compatibility. It's just whether we want to test that backwards compatibility much earlier, which I suspect we probably will. So yeah, let me come back to you on how we're going to roll out the DevNet 2, because the previous DevNet had mini pools, whereas this new one doesn't. So that does make a difference.
Yeah, it's all kind of a new learning experience for me and trying to understand how it works and doesn't work, and I understand in the DevNet it's only limited function in certain parts that are programmed, but it would be good eventually on Hoodie, I guess, to kind of recreate what many of our validators have on mainnet, which is, Houston or pre-Houston mini pools, and then just to be able to test the deployment and upgrade to Saturn One, and then be able to test the exiting of the mini pools and the conversion or the aggregation into the mega pools and that sort of stuff, just to kind of do almost like a realistic dry run for ready for mainnet when it launches.
Yeah, we did a little bit of that with the DevNet 1, but to be honest, testing that process over and over again doesn't hurt. So we'll definitely consider that.
So then let me ask another thing here. I guess we've got some of the RPIPs that kind of indicate what's in Saturn One and some stuff that we've left for Saturn Two, and I understand the community still has to vote on a couple of decisions for prior to the launch of Saturn One, and but some of those decisions may not actually be implemented to Saturn Two, but we've committed or at least instructed in our past RPIPs that we would make those decisions, mainly about RPL value capture and so forth ahead of time. But have you been able to make any determination on what is and isn't easy to fit into Saturn One? Like, do we have some flexibility about what we can include in Saturn One, or is it pretty much locked down in terms of the content in there?
So uh, I would say that it's lock so it's locked down at the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's inflexible. So it's locked down in the sense that we've the DAO have voted on what should be in Saturn 1, and so we're following that, but that doesn't mean that the DAO can't revote and adjust the scope. I would um, I would be very careful on adding stuff. Yeah, removing stuff is fine. That's perfectly fine. Um, I would be careful with adding stuff, because obviously adding stuff means we have to um, we have to reevaluate timelines and that sort of stuff. So just kind of like bear that in mind. But I would say it's locked but not inflexible is the answer to that.
Yeah, and there might be scope creep there, and I guess maybe I'll keep asking through the Dr. D questions here. One of those came up is the ideal of maybe this RPL value capture, right? In some way, and part of his questions here were in regards to the DAO funding, right? Right now, it's entirely funded by the RPL token, the native token, and one of the questions that was being kicked around in some conversations is there a way for the treasury, the PDAO, to take ETH as part of the node operator voter share commission as income? Is there a way to actually direct part of the ETH earnings to the DAO?
Yeah, so I've been engaging with that in the protocol funding thread. So I don't see a huge issue. I do need to get basically Kane to sanity check me, but I don't. So the DAO itself can take ETH and other tokens, so it can receive them. It just can't spend them. So the vault that we've got in within the Rocketball code can handle ETH and other tokens, so we can send it to the DAO quite easily, but uh, it can't at the moment. It can't spend ETH or other tokens. It can only spend RPL. So we would need to adjust the spending kind of proposals and that sort of thing. To be honest, that's not that's not difficult necessarily. I think it's you know we've already got the code, the proposals for RPL. We just need to adjust them for say other tokens. And with ETH, it's slightly more complicated, but I don't think it's that much more complicated. With the other tokens, we need to have some sort of whitelisting sort of thing. So depending on how complicated that whitelist is, uh, if just yeah, just depending on how complicated that whitelist is, that could change things very slightly. But it doesn't look like it's. It looks like it's pretty trivial to implement that stuff. So I don't see that being a huge issue. But I will get Kane to sanity check me to make sure that I'm not, talking crap.
And then any sense, and maybe you don't have it here, but any sense as to what the scope creep penalty would be for something like that? Are we talking a month delay, a 2 week delay, a quarter delay?
No, I don't see it being a massive delay. Like the dev work itself, there's more probably more work in the tests, but we've got tests that already cover the spends. So even the testing efforts, or the automated testing effort is probably not that bad. Um, like it's probably in the region of like a couple of days difference, rather than like weeks or months.
Okay, perfect. And then the other question he asks is kind of the same thing, ultimately whether or not the PDAL votes on it or determines this, but how difficult is it to shift the RPL rewards in there, right? I think right now it's 70% of them are going to the node operators and 30% to the DAO, and there's a 5% inflation on the token. If we needed to adjust any of those, whether the inflation number or the proration from node operators to the DAO, how easy is that? Is that just protocol settings and can be done outside of Saturn? Does it require something in Saturn? How difficult is it to shift the node operator rewards?
So, hang on, sorry. Okay, yeah, yeah, I see. Um, uh, that I don't. Again, I need to double check with Kane, but I think that I think that's basically uh, parameter changes. So the only kind of like complication that I initially see about that is kind of how often we want to do that, or do we want it to be just a one hit, um, or yeah, because there's within the Saturn RPIPs, there's basically one that says I think it's with Saturn one where it basically drops it to 1.5%. So what we're probably saying here is that we want at least one before that drops it a little bit before. You know what I mean? So it depends on what how often we want to do that. Because if it's not very often, then the PDAL can actually do that. I think the PDAL. No, actually, they're not sure whether the PDAL can do that actually. So it may well be that it's a PDAL Guardian thing. In which case, yeah, it just needs to be voted on, and then we can perform it. At some point, obviously, we want to get rid of the PDAL Guardian, but there's still a bit of work that we need to do in terms of getting like Security Council and all that sort of stuff set up. So we probably got a little bit of time for that. Um, but yeah, so in other what I'm saying there is that I believe that it's a parameter change, and I think it just needs governance around it rather than technical. Again, I will double check with Kane, but that seems to be where I think we are. To answer Halulu's question, I might need to unpack that very slightly. Yes. Um, yeah, the issue is if that we don't trust inputs. So if you're passing in like a ERC20 token address, that token address could be could be malicious, and so I mean this is my interpretation of what we might need in terms of having a whitelist of tokens. So for example, yeah, so the whitelist could be hard coded. It could be hard coded to basically just WEF or yeah, rETH and rETH, for example, um, oh, and RPL if we try and combine everything together, um, uh, or it could be like a parameterized thing that can be changed. Like I think hard coding it initially and then building parameterization later, maybe kind of sensible.
And just for those listening on the call, if you missed the question, Honolulu was asking, what was the reason for a whitelist with the disperse function or the token function versus say just allowing any ERC20, and if there is going to be a whitelist, why would it be hard coded? That was kind of the question, Langers, you were answering, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And then Hallelujah follows up. He asks, well, what about if we just made it fetch from the Rocket storage? It already works right now for rETH and RPL out of the box. Some design like that possible?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways of doing it, and what I'm saying there is there needs to be some mechanism, and so depending on how complicated that mechanism is, it either it's either dead simple or can get elaborate. And what the idea is to try to keep it as simple as possible so that we can actually like deliver it, but not code us into a situation where we're not completely inflexible. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let me, anything else on that you want to cover? I mean, you mentioned the conversation in the governance section, and like I said, I've been out for a couple of days and I haven't popped in there, and I know it's one of the things that was kind of debated, and ultimately the PDAO has to kind of make a decision. Where, how do we want the funding of the DAO and its treasury? Do we want it just RPL? Do we want to increase that RPL? Do we want to make an adjustment to it? Do we want any other ETH returns added to it? If so, what percentage it is? It doesn't seem like, unless I've missed something, that there's much consensus on there, right? A number of opinions, and I think that's something that the DAO, in terms of its governance, needs to start deciding on. If any, what change are we going to make, if any, right?
Yeah, I don't know whether is it gone to like a DAO forum post because that's probably I think the next step. It's like it's been in the thread. Maybe we need to open it up to to kind of like everyone to have a bounce around. But yeah, no, it's been definitely like interesting discussions, and I think there's some good viewpoints in there. Um, I think I haven't really put my kind of like thoughts in there. I kind of I see ah no, maybe I'll save it for when there's a DAO post up, and then so that it's actually recorded.
Yeah, and I see Dr. D and just the trading channel is thinking that he'll make, he intends to make a formal post pretty soon to, solicit this discussion and this input in a more, in a forum area where we can kind of flesh it out a little bit to see if there is a, to see if there is at least some, some concentration around a path forward that might be a pathway. Let me ask another question, though, that Dr. D had asked in the original opening here, which was switching a little bit over to commit boost, and more particularly here, Primev, which I think, for lack of word, is going to act as a gateway in there. Is there any update on them, and what is needed in order for Rocket Pool to integrate uh, um, um, commit boost into the nodes?
So okay, so during ETH Denver, I spoke to Drew, who's kind of one of the core devs on Commit Boost, or the core dev, quite possibly. Um, so so he, when I spoke to him, he said he's not quite ready for us. Uh, Now that doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't, keep progression. He's not ready for us when I mean by that, I mean he's like capacity wise. Rocky Pool brings a lot of nodes, and so a lot of individual nodes, and so that kind of like increases the capacity requirement for commit boost. So that's definitely one thing to kind of like bear in mind. But I have kind of like spoken to him. I've also spoken to him about getting like some pros and some like benefits and risks and that sort of thing. He hasn't quite come back to me yet, so I'll keep poking him, or I'll kind of like might drag you in, Ken, as well, to kind of like have a chat with him. But yeah, so that we can make sure that we describe it to the DAO. Essentially, in terms of, there are two things that we probably need. The first thing is uh, just some consensus on moving forward with commit boost, and I think that's getting there. I think, um, but yes, we probably need a bit more consensus on moving forward with it. I like it seems sensible, but yeah, just need some sort of rough consensus essentially. Then the only other thing is capacity. So it's just figuring out who's going to do it, who's going to like integrate it into the smart node. We can kind of like deal with that, but that is something that I'll need to kind of like manage, because I need to try and get the team, you know, delivering Saturn as well. So they're probably the two things. But I think once we have the rough consensus, it'll be easier for me to deal with the consensus, the capacity. Um, but yeah, that's the idea.
Okay, so that covers kind of the commit boost, right? Which is this sidecar, right? Do we integrate it into the 2E and into the smart node stack so that way a node operator could, like they do now, Mev boost, they could just opt in and run the sidecar, all right? But then we kind of need we need to select a gateway, right, to kind of represent the nodes blocks on there, right? And one of those, although they kind of describe it a little bit more as like order flow and so forth, but Primev, right? Certainly, I think I'd classify them as a gateway, somebody who we would delegate to make those pre-commitments on our validators in our blocks behalf at a time here. Any update from PrimeBev about kind of where they are about, accepting collateral through a smart contract from Rocket Pool node operators to select and opt into to choosing them as the node's gateway?
So I believe they've raised kind of like two approaches for how they don't do they call it I don't mean they do they call it slashing but essentially making sure that the node operator honors the pre-commitments. um, so they need some sort of way of like holding the node operator accountable. They've kind of proposed two approaches. The first one is to redirect the essentially the withdrawal address um, to this kind of like Primev contract, where they can then you know the amount and then forward it on. Um, or they've kind of done like a much more off-chain approach where they rely on the fact that people want these points that they're generating, and so they will essentially hold back the points if if they don't honor their commitments. So I think we just need to get back to them and say, like from my perspective, anyone can be a node operator with Rocket Pool. I think it's probably not a great idea to rely on the points system because that does rely a bit more on honesty. But then obviously the withdrawal stuff is a bit more work. So um, or it's a bit more complicated, I should say. So that's they're the things that we need to kind of like balance essentially.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe I asked this, or maybe I didn't ask this, but is there anything that the team needs from the community? Like, do you need a, a vote from the community to say we'd like, we would like the Rocket Pool to incorporate or support commit boost as part of the thing? Do you need some official vote or instruction, or is this just like client upgrades where it's just part of a team thing to put it in there and then the node operator can opt in or opt out? Or do you need anything from the governance side?
Yeah, I definitely think some sort of consensus on us moving forward with pre-commitments generally, and then with Primev as a provider. I think that would definitely be good. Um, I think with like MEV boost, for example, it's a bit easier. We that was quite obvious that that needed to be in there. I think pre-commitments is it's not quite as obvious, but it maybe it's getting to that point where at some point it may be obvious, but we don't know. So that's the thing. So yes, I think definitely some sort of rough consensus from the community on yes, let's move ahead with pre-commitments, and yes, let's integrate with Primev. That seems good. That's why I'm trying to get these kind of like benefits and risks from Drew. So I'll definitely follow up with him so that we can articulate that to the DAO, and then and everyone's on the same page essentially.
Okay, perfect. Well, that was the end of the kind of pre-submitted questions. I kind of open it up to the community as a whole. Anyone on the call, if anyone has any questions, or Langers, if you have anything you'd like to add before we move on. I don't know what left we have on today's agenda. Um, our so let me just invite anyone with questions to come forward now. Kind of a quiet group. What about Langers from your end? Anything that we haven't covered today that you feel is important for the community to know from the GM's point of view?
I think we can probably it's probably quite a short one today, but No, I mean the snapshot votes. I put an announcement out in terms of the snapshot votes. I think I put it in the announcement, but basically, um, uh, we will update the ODAO PDAO share on Monday. So we'll like, execute that via the PDAO Guardian. Um, the ODAO have already discussed how they're going to reduce their seats by 3 seats. The team will drop 2, and then there's one of the ODAO members who, for their own reasons, want to leave it anyway. So that is so that I'll kind of like communicate as well, and we'll kind of arrange for those seats to be essentially vacated over the next like couple of weeks. Um, so that's kind of like happening. There's an on-chain proposal which I'm gonna have a chat with Hululu about, um, which is cool and that's good to see. So we'll progress that, and I'll put out an announcement about that once I've clarified some stuff with Hululu, and then yeah, that's yeah, there's that going on. I mean, I met with Thomas, who's one of the incoming EF EDs yesterday. Super nice guy, and really kind of um, really wants to make a difference at the EF. He has a lot of priorities, but I'm I'm hoping we can get in front of him quite a bit and steer some of that stuff to help Rocket Pool. And then I raised a couple of things with him, which I think are quite important. So I think, yeah, and he seemed interested in helping us in those areas. So yeah, it's very, very, very cool.
Yeah, are those areas you could share with the community as a whole? I'm kind of curious what from your perspective we would want the EF to do for us.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's already kind of like happening behind the scenes, but definitely around the way that liquid staking tokens are treated. So, so the Proof of Stake Alliance, or they were formerly the Proof of Stake Alliance, they're actually merged with a larger group now, but they're like a policy group that are engaging with the SEC to write policy for staking in general. And like that group includes people like Consensus, Kraken, Lido. We've been kind of like in there as well, and yeah, a lot of kind of like staking businesses and protocols. So the idea there is that the SEC are very open door. They want suggestions, and so this group are trying to essentially fill that gap and create some new policy. And so I was talking to him about that to make sure that they're across that stuff as well, and that can help with pushing that forward. We're also kind of like setting up a meeting with Etherealize from that perspective as well. Again, kind of like um, making sure that staking is front and center with any discussions. The other things which Dr. D will probably um, find interesting. So the other thing I had a chat to him about was essentially making sure that decentralized protocols are on an even footing with uh, more centralized kind of businesses and protocols, and that's more around how like legal entities and that sort of thing happens. So so really, how can larger organizations engage with decentralized protocols and that sort of thing, making it an easy path for basically for adoption, um, making it easy. That's it, making it easy for adoption to flow to decentralized protocols and teams, and not just the centralized teams. So that's a very key element that I think is um, needs to be needs to be addressed. So that's what I was talking to him about.
Interesting. And then, did you ever share anything that Rocket Bowl could do for the EF?
We didn't really get to, much about that, but I think we are definitely a good um, we're definitely a good viewpoint. He was very he knows that we're kind of a very aligned protocol, and uh, he kind of like respects our opinion, and so I think being in the room is definitely going to help us, and them ideally. Paladin was saying about issuance. So yeah, so the issuance discussion is definitely still happening. So I'm in like me and there's a few other people in the community as well, but I might um so the issuance conversation is definitely happening. I'm in a new group, um, and I've just got to digest what they're kind of like saying. So to see where they're kind of up to. But that is still kind of the discussion is still happening. I think a lot of talk I think was about the very small snippets I've kind of like caught up on is they're wondering like whether issuance will change now or when the beam chain is released. So I don't know whether that's like a now or and much later or not. So I'll definitely catch up on that because that's literally on my list for today. Although it may well be a Monday thing for me to catch up on what's going on in there. But it's definitely something I'm keeping a very strong eye on.
Yeah, perfect. And then kind of back to the conversation on the EF, I did see that somewhere in crypto Twitter, maybe it was the Dev Connect channel, they were, they're kind of planning, it's a little nebulous here, but they're planning this, World's Day at Dev Connect in Buenos Aires on the November 17th. And it's a little unclear what, excuse me, what that World's Day looks like. Is it just a big kind of a vendor booth fair in which a number of protocols are displaying their services, their DeFi services, such that way a user can understand all what they could do in Ethereum. But anyhow, there was a tweet posted, and it was asking for what protocols of Ethereum should be invited to participate in that World Fair demo day. And I'd submitted Rocket Pool. I think others had too, or they retweeted it. So if folks listening to this get a chance and are interested in submitting some of their protocols, please do so and consider maybe suggesting Rocket Pool in there. I don't know if that's something that's been looked at, but that would be great to be invited by the EF as one of the illustrative protocols in Ethereum. I see one
Yeah,
last.
cool. That would be
Oh,
interesting.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Langers.
No, I was just saying that sounds interesting. Actually, be good to be a part of that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't quite know if I understand what that is. It's the first time they're doing it, but it sounds interesting and a little bit intriguing there. So maybe that's something, if we have the opportunity to follow up, we can kind of advocate for an invite in the fair. Um, and then I see that Lee has also asked a question. Maybe we could circle back to the very beginning there, which is regarding Hoodie and the DevNet launch. You mentioned kind of the plans to do DevNet 2 on Hoodie, but I don't know if we covered an ETA on that. Any thoughts about when we'll see Hoodie DevNet 2 being added to it? And Lee, you might have missed it earlier. They're not going to launch regular rocket pool, kind of the Houston Sat 0 rocket pool, until after DevNet 2 on Hoodie. But when do you think you might have DevNet 2 on Hoodie?
So it kind of depends on when we're code complete. I am probably like a lot of the contract stuff is done, and uh, some of the smart node stuff is kind of like done, but we're still kind of like working through the smart node stuff. Um, I would I would say we're probably 2 weeks behind at the moment. Um, but I'll definitely you know catch up with the team and kind of like figure out how we can make sure that we get it done as soon as possible. When I say 2 weeks behind, I mean we're supposed to be releasing it like in like a week in a tiny bit's time. So we're probably 2 weeks after that. So like mid-April at the moment is when we're probably looking at DevNet 2. But again, I need to go through that with the team and make sure that that's cool with them.
Okay, perfect. And then Mav, I don't know if you're still with us here, but anything you'd like to share with the community before we kind of bring today's call to a close? Any updates about events coming up?
For me, it would just be keep an eye out for the upcoming community calls. We have 2 to 4 guests lined up. Unfortunately, our guest for this week was unable to make it, but we do have some exciting topics to discuss in the following weeks, including quite probably restaking and some new DeFi applications built on rETH. So keep an eye out for that. And all going well, we'll be able to have our first community call back on Twitter or X Spaces. So make sure your X accounts are ready to go for that.
Excellent. That sounds like a lot of fun. Um, Anything else before we call it a wrap?
I think that's awesome. Thank you, Ken.
All right. Well, again, it's been a pleasure to get caught up here. You'll find me back in trading right after this. But Langers, thank you very much for all the time and sharing your thoughts on there. Dr. D, special shout out to you for all the excellent questions. And Mav, as always, thank you very much for kind of arranging this and finding all of the guest speakers coming up here in the new lineup. It looks like it sounds pretty exciting ahead. All right, I'm going to let everyone go and enjoy the rest of the day.
Cheers, everybody.